first sights we saw as the rescue squad arrived at its Salvation Army headquarters. People helping themselves to drinking water direct from a water system that cannot deliver it to their faucets. People jostling one another for food handed out at the occasional street corner. People praying for salvation. For this rescue team, seeing the damage, the obvious suffering of countless people, the thousands of homeless living in tents or under blankets, the urge to help was overwhelming. But helping would have to wait. The first step was to get organized.
How many people in each team?
4 to 5 people. That's a physician, that's paramedics, and Spanish speaking one. Oh, excellent. So we have already started the team if you want it.
Okay, you guys are organized. We worked hard to get this organized.
These are some of the 21 men and women, paramedics from Seattle, Redmond, and Bellevue, and 3 doctors from Harborview, sent here to relieve an exhausted medical team from San Francisco. And it was only a few hours before their skills were put to work. Seattle paramedic Chris Beatty sutures the torn chin of a teenage girl, the first of what promises to be a long list of patients. The group is headed by Seattle paramedic Danny Gomez, who is touched by the need here and by the gratitude of the Mexican people for the help of the Seattle team.
The people just, I mean, it's just unbelievable. They're putting out their arms to us. Like they say, your house is my house. It's just unbelievable. I've never seen anything like it. It's phenomenal.
The Seattle team realizes it can make only a relatively small contribution in this overwhelming human tragedy. Still, they're eager to help, to do all they can. In Mexico City, Bob Branham, Cairo, Eyewitness News. The 21 doctors, paramedics, and firefighters spent most of the day organizing a free neighborhood clinic. These are not necessarily direct victims of the earthquakes, but the quakes have shattered their world, and for many who are sick or hurt, there is simply nowhere else to turn. Mark Aguilar made it his mission to tour the neighborhood, one of the poorest in Mexico City. Mark is a firefighter from Bellevue, but he was raised in Mazatlan and has family there and here in Mexico City. And what he has seen here disturbs him profoundly.
The government has not helped them in any way whatsoever.
We toured a makeshift village of tents and blankets. The people are afraid of their weakened, poorly constructed apartments and are living out in the street. No running water, very little food, 2 toilets to serve 250 people. The people here have heard that help is coming from many countries, including the U.S. But so far, most attention is being given to crumpled high-rises in the wealthier parts of town. These people say they are victims too, but no one is listening to them.
It makes me sad, to see that the government officials are absorbing, what the other countries are giving and not letting it bleed down to the people who are really the needy.
In spite of everything, almost everyone we've spoken to has seemed hopeful, even happy. They're confident that help is on the way. Mark Aguilar wishes he could be so sure. In Mexico City, Bob Branham, Cairo, Eyewitness News.
Good evening. 11 days after 2 earthquakes shook Mexico City to its foundations, the search goes on for victims and survivors. And the Mexican government says it will go on until they can find no more signs of life. The latest figures put the death toll at 5,200. 24 missing Americans have now been given up for dead by the U.S. Embassy. 50,000 people still homeless. The damage, more than $5 billion. Last week, a medical team from the Northwest, including people from Seattle, flew to Mexico's capital to help and heal, and Bob Branham was with them. He's just returned from Mexico this evening, Bob, and apparently you reporting for us that the efforts of our team from the Northwest haven't gone unnoticed.
Not at all, Linda, quite the opposite. In fact, the whole Puget Sound area can be proud of the contributions being made right now by a very dedicated team of doctors, paramedics, and firefighters from Seattle, Bellevue, and Redmond. Their mission to Mexico is a combined effort of the City of Seattle, the Salvation Army, and Mexican Airlines, which provided the travel. And that mission is really paying off. Most of the work of the Seattle area team is in a Salvation Army relief mission deep in one of Mexico City's poorest areas, one that was hard hit by the 2 big earthquakes. Many people here are afraid to live in their crumpled buildings, so they are living in tents out on the street. They get their water by dipping directly into the crippled city water mains. The medical team is seeing up to 200 patients a day, many of them suffering from what's being called post-earthquake stress syndrome. And when they're not in the clinic, special response teams jump into an ambulance that's ready 24 hours a day to provide medical care at places like this. A garment factory, once 10 stories high, pancaked into 5. Nobody knows how many were inside at the time, but several people have been pulled out alive, even 8 days after the quake. The Seattle team is there to provide aid on the way to the hospital.
We get to the scene, there will be somebody at the scene who can take charge and says, this is the team. These guys will do the IVs, these guys will do the transporting. And we established that. We established that through the government. It's hard to put in words. I mean, they've been working day and night to get this done, and they did it.
In fact, they are doing it so well that the Seattle team is now the medical response team called to every earthquake disaster location in Mexico City right now. They didn't ask for that honor. They have earned it by their hard work. The 21-member team will be on the job there until this coming Thursday.
It's an amazing thing, the stories coming out of Mexico City.
It's amazing that people can be alive 8 days, crushed and pinned under all that concrete and steel.
But you said that the entire city does not look like it's been bombed out, that that's a rather small portion of the city, as bad as the devastation is there.
Right, and we shouldn't minimize the disaster down there, but it is true that a lot of people have the notion that Mexico City is leveled, and really quite the opposite is true. Perhaps 1% of the buildings were even affected by the earthquake. That means that 99% are still standing, and the city is really in pretty good functioning order, which surprises a lot of people.
It's amazing. I've heard reports out of there that some of the oldest and really old ancient structures withstood the shock of the earthquake.
Yes, and one of the biggest embarrassments now for the government is that among the most heavily damaged buildings are government buildings, lending some to think that there was a lot of graft and corruption involved in the construction of those buildings.
Obviously have not heard the last of this.
No, and I'm sure the death toll and people missing and people homeless will continue to climb.
All right, thanks, Bob, and welcome back, and good job.
Thank you.
Well, generosity has so overwhelmed Mexico's government that it has had to say enough. Supplies pouring in from everyone wanting to help have already stuffed warehouses to the limit. What's needed now is not more supplies, but a way to distribute everything. And to that end, computers have been enlisted to help keep track of where material's coming from, where it's being kept, and how to get it where it's needed most. But the aid is needed, and that prompted MexAid, a telethon to raise money to pay off part of that $5 billion damage bill. Nadine Berger reports that so far, people have been lining up coast to coast to give.
Help for the people of Mexico City arrived in the form of entertainment.
Para de Televisión presenta México, estamos contigo.
Dozens of Hispanic and international stars performed today in a coast-to-coast telethon expected to raise over $3 million. The theme, Mexico, We're With You, is expected to raise spirits as well.
What we're trying to do with this telethon is to try to wipe away not only the blood, but the tears from the people.
The telethon is being broadcast to 7 nations. Included is a special message to Mexico from the Pope. It is hoped that televising the fundraiser will bring more contributions. In Los Angeles alone, over 1,000 volunteers took pledges, and everyone from the man on the street to the big stars are contributing. Money raised by the telethon will go to the Red Cross to help the victims of the earthquake, to help with survival, and to rebuild their city. Nadine Berger, CBS News, Los Angeles.
It is now day 5 for the Seattle area medical team, now working with the earthquake victims in Mexico City. The 21-member group left SeaTac Thursday in a cooperative effort by the City of Seattle, the Salvation Army, and Mexicana Airlines. Mexicana provided the airplane for the flight to Mexico City. Bob Branham went along on this first-of-a-kind mercy mission to Mexico and brought back a story of its life and death work.
We were on our way to inspect a damage site when word came from the American Embassy that a paramedic team was needed at a collapsed building, and fast. Seattle paramedics Don Sharp and Clyde Neville and Seattle firefighter Rafael Vargas, serving as interpreter, arrived to find this. A 10-story building flattened to 5 stories when an earthquake measuring 8.3 on the Richter scale rumbled through Mexico City September 19th. Lately, sounds had been heard within, and the Seattle Quick Response Team was ready to help in any way it could.
Then we have 1 to 2 teams, depending on how many we can spare from the clinic, to come on out and give you a hand, anything you need. What do they have? Have you heard?
Because we were out of bodies.
Mostly dead.
This was a garment factory filled with workers, and countless were crushed to death. Tattered remnants of garments still fluttered, adding ironic splashes of brightness to a scene of horror. Still, more than a week later, there was reason for hope. As hard as it is to believe, miraculously, one woman was found alive in there 8 days after it collapsed. On this day, however, the rescue teams were not so lucky. The Seattle medics stood by as night fell. Portable lights aided the rescuers, tunneling through the building. 14 people were located, but all were dead. Sadly, the Seattle team was not needed here. But the need for the team never stops here. This is an emergency Salvation Army clinic in one of the most heavily damaged areas of the city. This clinic is the headquarters for the Seattle team, as the 3 doctors from Harborview and paramedics from Seattle, Redmond, and Bellevue are treating up to 200 patients a day. Complaints range from broken bones to chronic diarrhea to sore throats. Nancy Sugg is one of the doctors volunteering her time and skills. Here, with Bellevue firefighter Mark Aguilar interpreting. Dr. Sugg listens as a worried mother tells Aguilar that her son suffered severe shock when the quake hit.
She said he got real white. It sounded real shocking. He got real white, started screaming and hysterically crying, and that had passed, but it happened again today.
The doctors heard the same story over and over, and the condition became known as post-earthquake stress syndrome.
This is from the shock of the earthquake, and he's just going to need a lot of attention and a lot of comfort until he kind of gets through this period of anxiety.
The Seattle team relieved an exhausted crew from San Francisco that arrived a few days after the quake. The better organized Seattle group built a fine pharmacy, treated a non-stop flow of patients, and so impressed the authorities with its mobile response capability that it was chosen as the single paramedic unit sent anywhere in the city whenever a victim was found or a rescuer was injured digging through the rubble. And their hosts, the Salvation Army, had nothing but praise for their efforts.
The Seattle group, of which I am wearing their hat, has done us a tremendous job. And within an hour of their being here, we called and asked for some assistance, and they were there in a matter of seconds on emergency treatment for a lady that had cut herself pretty badly. So we found that they're a tremendous team to work with.
Before the Seattle team arrived here, the Salvation Army had intended this to be a temporary clinic only. But encouraged by the success and the performance of the Seattle team, the Salvation Army now intends to keep this clinic open indefinitely. Of all the lasting legacies of the Seattle team's visit, this is no doubt their proudest. In Mexico City, Bob Branham, Cairo, Eyewitness News.
Were lending a hand in that earthquake-ravaged city. The Seattle team is learning more than just how to cope with the earthquake disaster. It is learning about the way Mexico is coping with it. Bob Branham reports tonight from Mexico City. It is not always a happy lesson.
Mexico City is a city of contrasts. News reports showing scenes like this almost every night lead many people to believe that the Mexico City earthquakes have reduced most of the city to rubble. What they don't show is this. Streets full of people, stores full of shoppers, tree-lined busy thoroughfares, thousands of buildings with little or no damage. Estimates are 99% of the people and buildings of Mexico City survived the earthquakes intact. The contrast between the pockets of catastrophe you see and business as usual in the rest of the city is jarring. Despite a mounting death toll, hundreds of ruined buildings, and thousands of homeless people, life goes on here. Many of the city's 13 million people carry on almost as though nothing has happened. But many others feel they too, like the dead and injured, are earthquake victims. They are Mexico City's poor. Here in one of the poorest barrios, the people still gaze in wonder at the city's sleek, efficient subway system. But now they gaze from a circus of tents and blankets set up in the streets. Mark Aguilar is a firefighter from Bellevue and one of 21 doctors, paramedics, and firefighters from the Seattle area now helping earthquake victims in Mexico City. Mark was raised in Mazatlan, has family there and here in Mexico City, and his heart cries out for the suffering living victims of the Mexican earthquakes.
The government has not helped them in any way whatsoever. The only donations that they have had are from people who are a little better off, who are donating some type of food. And yesterday they came and gave them some blankets, which wasn't like one blanket per person, it was one for every three. He said right now it's just barely enough, to keep the people from starving, and they are still hungry.
We were welcomed into the tiny, drafty homes of this tent city. The people have brought all their belongings here, even TVs and radios, because they do not know when they'll be able to return to their permanent homes. Their homes were badly damaged in the quakes. Walls are split, ceilings have collapsed. This tiny room, which once housed a family of 7, is now a pile of rubble. There's no running water. It must be drawn by hand from the city's crippled water system. And for this tent city of 250 people, there are but 2 toilets. Yet, with the cold winds of winter coming on, here they stay. They have no choice. They have no money, little health care, and as yet, no contact from the government.
I feel like they're in desperate need of some immediate help and shelter.
Their situation seems hopeless, and yet you find no shortage of smiling faces here. These people have heard that help is arriving in Mexico from around the world. They have heard their government promise to rebuild the damaged downtown buildings, and they believe that soon help will come to the barrios too. But in this land of contrasts between rich and poor, landed and landless, powerful and powerless, Mark Aguilar wonders whether that help will come in time for these people, or indeed, whether it will come at all. Mark Aguilar and the others are frustrated both by the enormity of the problems here and by the inefficiency of the government in dealing with them. Life in Mexico City does go on, but the contrast between the good life and the life here couldn't be sharper. In Mexico City, Bob Branham, Cairo.
A new team from Tacoma will relieve another team from the Seattle area that flew to the earthquake-ravaged city last week. Bob Branham has been with that original Seattle team, and he's back now with his eyewitness account. Bob?
Thank you, John. The Seattle team will brief the incoming Tacoma group tonight and tomorrow morning before the Seattle group flies back to Seattle tomorrow. The Seattle group has done such a great job down there, they have earned the honor of being the medical team called to every earthquake-related emergency call. And believe it or not, those calls are still coming in. Today, a 9-year-old boy and his grandfather were pulled from the rubble of a building fully 14 days after that first horrendous earthquake. Most of Mexico City survived the quakes without major damage or injury, but the quake knocked out most telephone and telegraph service. So we helped out the Mexican consul here in Seattle, Senor Hector Blanco Melo. Even this diplomat was unable to reach his family in Mexico City, so we visited his daughter at his apartment there and brought back to him a letter from her assuring him that his family, home, and possessions were intact. So you know that communications were difficult down there if a diplomat can't even reach his family and home in Mexico City.
Bob, it wasn't until your reports of the past couple of days from Mexico City that I really got an understanding of how much of Mexico City is intact and unaffected by all of this. What a sharp contrast that must be.
Well, it is amazing because you'll go down the street and some buildings will be perfectly intact, others will be reduced to rubble, but the truth is fully 99% of Mexico City is standing. 99% plus of the people there were unaffected by the quake, except through the loss of loved ones and some injuries. But from the pictures you see on TV, you would think that the entire city was reduced to rubble, and that simply is not the case.
Your reports have so dramatically shown the emotion that has gone into the people from this area who've gone down there to help. You had to have gotten caught up in some of that emotion. Is it depressing? Is it... How do you feel walking away from there?
Well, walking away, it is somewhat depressing, but when we were down there, I would say the feeling was exhilaration, and that may sound a little bit odd, but the Seattle group, and we too, were so eager to help the people down there that those people were at times working 24 hours a day without rest, and their biggest concern was to help the people there, and they were excited to be there, thrilled to be contributing what, little they could, considering the magnitude of the destruction and the injuries down there. But I would say that the team was just really hyped and pumped to help those people as much as they could, and they did one heck of a good job.
Those were not the best of working conditions. Thank you very much for excellent reports coming back from them.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be back.
Bob, very quickly, you mentioned the Seattle team. There were people from other cities and departments, were there not, involved?
Yes, there were. In fact, the Seattle team relieved a team from San Francisco, and actually, it may seem astonishing, but at the rescue sites where they are going in trying to rescue people and take care of the dead that are there, the Mexican authorities are taking a hands-off approach.
only foreigners are helping out. The Spaniards are specialists at digging into those buildings. Americans are specialists at medical teams and at search and rescue. Canadians are there with heavy equipment. It's truly a multinational effort, but oddly enough, the Mexican government is taking very little role in it. Thank you, Bob. You're welcome.
Home. Back to families and friends, back to their professions as doctors, nurses, firefighters, and paramedics. The 21 members of the Seattle Emergency Medical Team came home with their mission accomplished, but with the memories of what they saw and felt still deep in their minds and in their hearts. What they saw was a city scarred by a devastating earthquake. Eyewitness News was there as Seattle, Redmond, and Bellevue emergency workers assisted in searching for people still trapped in the rubble, and as they worked with families living in makeshift homes since their own homes were destroyed.
Okay.
But this is where the team made the biggest contribution, the Salvation Army Clinic, where more than 200 people a day would come for help.
We left them with one of the best clinics around. We had people coming to us. They'd never seen a doctor, 80 years old. You know, and I'd ask them, you know, well, why did you come to the clinic? And their words to me were, you know, we heard you're the best doctors in town. And that left a really good feeling in us. Excuse me.
You must be really proud.
Yeah, I didn't want to leave.